Take a look around you. No, really, take a minute and look around. What do you notice? What do you see? Friends, parents, enemies, a teacher who's also your enemy? It happens. If there's a window in the room where you are, look outside. What do you see there? Now, look inside yourself. What do you desire, really desire in this moment? What kind of world do you want to live in? Now, what can you do to make that world a reality? Take one more look around. Does the world look any different now? Oh, did you see that quark go whirring by your ear? Can you see your friend's mitochondria working like little power plants to keep her body running? As my favorite band U2 sings, when you look at the world, what is it that you see? Can you see the Holy Spirit, God's life-giving breath, breathing in you and in all creation at this moment? Can you feel the pain that the last member of a species might feel as it expels its final breath and enters extinction? Can you feel the agony of plants choked by polluted air, just as George Floyd felt the breath of life choked out of him as he cried out, "I can't breathe"? My friends, the universe we inhabit is an incredible place. In every moment, in every breath, we participate with countless creatures in a great dance of life, accompanied by the Spirit in whom all things exist and who desires every creature's flourishing. Yet at the same time, this incredible universe and the tiny, by cosmic standards, white, blue, and green marble we inhabit is enduring a crisis unlike anything it's ever seen before. Sure, there have been other, more violent periods in Earth's history, but this time the threat is coming from inside the house. This time, the meteor striking our planet is one of Earth's own creatures, humanity, or as in Jordan Peele's great movie, the threat is us. To get started today, I want to say a little bit more about the crisis facing our planet. I'm sure all of us have heard about climate change. We know that the planet is warming, that our summers are the hottest on record. We've seen record-breaking ice melt in the Arctic, and we may even know that due to human activity, species are going extinct at a rate 10,000 times faster than they would if nature were operating well naturally. We fear sea level rise, and we watch as coastal indigenous peoples find themselves displaced because the ocean is too warm or too acidic to sustain the communities of fish and animals they once hunted. Yet these are only symptoms of a deeper condition. Today, ecologists are sounding the alarm about feedback loops, networks of interrelated factors that will keep climate change going even if, say, we stop burning fossil fuels or we end factory farming. To illustrate how feedback loops work, consider this. Industrial farms, which use industrial processes to raise vegetables and animals, are the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. Industrial farms produce tons of methane and CO2. If you've been near a farm, you've smelled it, which enters the atmosphere and raises global temperatures. This causes polar ice to melt, increasing ocean temperatures and raising sea levels. You can imagine polar ice like a gigantic ice cube dropped into the sea. Ocean warming melts more ice, which raises temperatures even more. Eventually, this cycle of warming and warming takes on a life of its own, so that Earth's temperature will continue to rise even if we end factory farming. On top of all this, data shows that, get this, 30 to 40% of the food produced in the United States each year gets wasted. That's because the industrial farming industry doesn't care about feeding people, not really. It cares about money, profit. And all the while, millions of people in the United States remain hungry and malnourished. And that doesn't even include those in extreme situations of poverty around the world. The injustice is obvious. These links between industrial agriculture, wealth, poverty, and ecological degradation offer one illustration of the technocratic paradigm Pope Francis denounces in Laudato Si. To be clear, the technocratic paradigm isn't about science or technology in itself. Francis says that science and tech do many good things. The technocratic paradigm is about power, about how we use science and technology to dominate and destroy lands and peoples. The word itself shows this. Technocratic is like democratic, but whereas democratic means ruled by the people, technocratic means ruled by technology. So the technocratic paradigm is a social structure, a way of setting up the world, which uses tech power to maximize profit, no matter the cost to Earth and its creatures, both human and otherwise. The best illustration of the technocratic paradigm that I can think of is probably bottled water. It's cleaner than tap water, right? Well, in most cases, it's not. In fact, about 90% of the tap water in the United States is perfectly clean. And in some cases, more than you'd think, the water that comes out of our faucets is actually the same water companies are bottling and selling us. On top of that, think of the cost of bottled water. When I was in grad school at Fordham University in New York, I definitely found myself wanting water when I went out on a hot summer day. Sometimes I'd buy a bottle, 20 ounces, for $1.50 or $2. Now do the math. Even water that costs $1 for 20 ounces comes out to over $6 a gallon, more than a gallon of milk or a gallon of gas. Yet somehow companies have convinced us that we need bottled water. So we're willing to drop $6 a gallon for something we can get basically for free. This analysis doesn't even include ecological impacts, all that plastic, or the fact that billions of creatures lack access to clean water, living in thirst because of the practices of the same companies that are selling us Crystal Geyser and Poland Spring. This time, the injustice isn't just obvious, it's obnoxious. And hey, I hope to Ignatius that you'll never buy bottled water again. This brings me to my next point, the causes of the crisis. How could people, especially those who say they desire justice and goodness, even people formed in the Ignatian tradition, not stop this from happening? Or worse, enable these injustices to continue? There are lots of ways we might answer this question. But for today, I want to focus on just one. There's a terrific biblical scholar named Richard Bauckham who says that our ecological crisis began when, somewhere in our history, we humans forgot that we are creatures. This idea of being creatures, what we call creatureliness, has two dimensions, one scientific and one theological. From a scientific standpoint, we are creatures because of our evolutionary history and our ecological interconnectedness. From the standpoint of evolution, we humans emerged with every other creature in the universe from a cosmic process that spans almost 14 billion years. In the beginning, in the moments after the Big Bang, the universe we know began to form. Quarks and leptons, protons and electrons joined together, forming the foundations for matter. Stars sprang into existence and planets formed as space itself expanded. It continues to expand today. Then, about 4.5 billion years ago, in a not very special corner of a not very special galaxy, our Earth formed. Proteins combined in superhot seas, providing the foundations for life. That life evolved into more and more complex forms, and first in oceans and then on land, what Darwin named, quote, endless forms most beautiful, came into being. We are indeed creatures of evolution. But the reason we are the way we are, and not some other way, is because of the particular environments our ancestors and their ancestors before them inhabited. In this sense, evolution is a deeply ecological process. Every adaptation and variation in species, from beak shapes to skin tones, results from interactions between creatures and the ecosystems in which they live. In fact, while many of us know that our blood is red because it's rich in iron, not many of us know that it's also rich in iron because the crust of the earth from which we emerged is iron rich. We are what we are because of what's around us. Every breath we take is given to us by the trees that process the CO2 we exhale. The water that sustains our survival flows from an incredible network of processes that, through human ingenuity, culminates in our ability to turn on a tap and take a cool drink on a hot day, and not to drink from disposable plastic bottles. Don't forget that. Here again, we are creatures who share ecosystems with endlessly beautiful life forms. From a theological point of view, we are creatures of a loving creator God who breathes life into every tree, sparrow, woman, child, and trans person. God's presence flows in every river and blows in every breeze. Without God, our universe would not and could not be. This is the second dimension of our creatureliness. Yet, as Bauckham says, we have forgotten that we are creatures. We humans have come to see ourselves as better than, above, superior. And this forgetfulness allows us to remain indifferent. It's not that we're out to get anyone or anything. We don't want to do harm. We just don't care. And often we don't have to. And while so many go about their everyday lives, sea levels rise and coastal communities are destroyed. Poverty and ecological degradation ravage lands and peoples, making the rich richer while the poor cannot meet their most basic needs. Quietly and insidiously, indifference excuses injustice. It hides realities like ecological racism, a reality illustrated by the fact that you can predict the locations of Black and brown communities by using a map of toxic waste dumps. Indifference is the soul of injustice. But my friends, there's never a good reason to allow injustice to continue. Wherever creatures are suffering and dying, those formed in the tradition of Ignatius are called, as Ignacio Echeverria put it, to take them down from their crosses and to work to save them. Not in a spiritual sense, not to preach them news of an otherworldly heaven, but to save them from the systems of oppression that cause them to suffer, to bring them salvation in the here and now. For indeed, against those who would deny the creatureliness we share with every animal, plant, river, and rock on this planet, against those who would say that human interests are the only ones that matter, against those who would encourage us to remain indifferent in the face of oppression and an exploitative status quo, science and faith boldly proclaim that everything is interconnected, that we depend on each other, that, as the Jesuit astrophysicist William Steger wrote, we are in deep solidarity with all living things on this earth. Recognizing this solidarity is the beginning, not the end, of ecological and social justice. Justice begins when we change how we see. This means striving to take off the blinders society places on our vision, the blinders that keep us indifferent by shielding us from the suffering of Earth's creatures, extinction, poverty, pollution, and racism. I like to call this changed vision a creation imagination, which sees reality in terms of creatureliness and our interconnectedness with everything that has existed, that exists, and that will exist in the future. From the standpoint of our Ignatian tradition, a creation imagination gives new meaning to finding God in all things. A creation imagination challenges us to see God as really there, as really present, and really active in every creature. And this awareness calls us to action. For just as the martyrs of El Salvador saw God's presence in the poor and were so inspired to denounce oppression and seek liberation for the least ones, even dying for the cause, so we are called to find God in the least ones of creation and to live our lives in a way that promotes justice and flourishing for every creature God has made. I think two resources from the Ignatian tradition can start us on the path toward this change in vision. The first is the fourth week contemplation from the spiritual exercises, which invites us to see God's presence and action in all things. It reads, I will consider how God dwells in the creatures, in the elements, giving them existence, in the plants, giving them life, in the animals, and finally, how in this way God dwells also in myself. This contemplation challenges us to see the world as charged with the grandeur of God, to use the words of the great Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins. And so I ask, how would your life be different? And how would the world be different if we saw creation in this way? The second resource is the spiritual exercises three-part colloquy. The colloquy asks three questions. What have I done for Christ? What am I doing for Christ? What will I do for Christ? But who is Christ in the world today? Finding Christ in the poor of El Salvador led Ellacuría to reimagine the colloquy in different terms. He asked, what am I doing for the poor? What have I done to crucify them? What am I doing to end their crucifixion? What should I do so that this people might rise from the dead? Powerful stuff. And following Ellacuría's example, we might ask, what am I doing for creation? How do I participate in creation's crucifixion? What should I do so that creation might rise from the dead? Asking these questions propels us from vision to action. And so in the spirit of Ellacuría, I'll conclude this address by offering a few practical suggestions for reorienting our vision and working for ecological and social justice in a world so much in need. At the level of vision, first, don't accept the status quo. For our planet, for the poor, for people of color, women, and LGBTQ+ folks, the status quo is an instrument of injustice and violence, and can even be a death sentence. This means that if we're going to work for ecological justice, we must also work for racial justice and gender justice, because all of these injustices are part of the systems that drive the technocratic paradigm. We must recognize that violence against both women and Mother Earth, note the feminine language we use for the planet, walk hand in hand. We must seek an integrated response that does justice for all. Again, everything is connected. Second, train your focus on impact rather than on intention. Rather than living your life focused on getting what you want, make decisions on what does the greatest good, on the magis that glorifies God as creator. If ecological justice is about what brings life and flourishing to all, we must act in ways that promote the widest possible good and ask others to do the same. At the level of action, first, eat less meat. Recall that industrial agriculture is the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases. Cutting your meat consumption by just 1/3, going vegetarian 3 days a week or 1 meal a day can reduce your individual greenhouse emissions by up to 40%. For more, go back and read Genesis 1-9 again. God creates us as vegetarians. Second, start a community garden in your school, parish, family, or friend group. Most schools and churches have a little land lying around. Well, you know what that land is? A garden just waiting to be grown. So grow it. Get your hands dirty. Learn what it's like to make life bloom and use what you grow to feed those most in need in your local communities. Here again, ecological and social justice go hand in hand. Third, speaking of local communities, live life locally. Get your groceries from a farmer's market or directly from a farmer rather than from a giant supermarket. Build relationships on the ground with farm workers and support them. After all, farm workers are one of the poorest populations in our country, and they're often people of color. Here again, ecological justice is racial justice, is economic justice. Fourth, build a movement. It doesn't have to be a 1,000,000-person march. Start small. Get some friends together and think of ways you can make a difference. One of the best ways to challenge the technocratic paradigm's domination is by building small communities. Fifth, when people in power aren't working for the greater good, challenge them. Speak up and speak out. This might mean marching in the streets with a Black Lives Matter sign. It might mean talking to a friend or a teacher or a parent or priest when they say something that could do harm. Whenever you see oppression, poverty, and degradation, whether it's ecological or otherwise, speak. Sixth, and finally, never make excuses, because excuses just let the status quo of injustice and suffering continue. But things don't have to be this way. Keep your hearts and imaginations open to new possibilities, and wherever suffering is, go there and work to make things better. None of this will be easy, but in the name of Jesus and the Salvadoran martyrs and all who, guided by our Jesuit tradition, have witnessed to the possibility of a different future, we must do what needs to be done. So, take a look around. What do you see that you didn't see before? Did you see that cork fly by this time? Do you see the roots of a great oak stretching down into ancient soil, the seedbed of life? Do you feel in the breeze God's breath of life blowing among us? And what do you desire? Do you desire a planet that is thriving, fully and wonderfully alive? Do you want a world of justice, true, abundant justice for all creation? Hey, me too. Now, what will you do to make it so? Inspired by the great legacy of Ignatius and guided by the Holy Spirit, let's get to work.